Stayed home and slept.
There we go. We good? All right. I'd like to welcome everybody to October 3rd, Monday's Town Board meeting. Will we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to have a motion to accept the minutes of September 12th and 19th, 2022.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any public comments on resolutions and town business? None? Good. Okay. I'd like to do, I'd like to have a motion to go into the workshops. The first would be about the Hyde Park Town Hall Addition update and presentation by the engineer Pete Sotero, Clark Patterson Lee Architecture, Engineering and Planning. Thank you, Pete. Oh, and Brad.
You want us over there at that thing?
Wherever you feel more comfortable.
I just sort of sit here. Is that okay to sit here?
Yeah?
We'll sit here.
Just hit the mic, Pete, make sure that's on.
You got the
Yeah. I'm going to pass out some packets because I know most of the board members have not seen the information we've developed so far to date.
Thank you.
Give you some idea. You take these home tonight, study them, and have a quiz tomorrow.
Fine, yeah. Thank you.
Bedtime reading. Good, thank you.
Whoops. Yeah. Yeah, let me just go use this one. Here, why don't you sit over here, because you're gonna do a little bit of talking. Okay, good evening. Thank you. I also want to introduce Brad Pettijohn. Brad's an architect in our Newburgh office. He's also a Hyde Park resident. And Brad developed, the concept plans and that you have there in front of you. So I asked Brad if he could come tonight in case anybody had any, questions. I'm going to try to keep it, brief. I want to give you a little bit of, the background outside of Al, and John. I don't think that the rest of you have had too much of an update. So back in, I believe it was the spring of 2021, we were contacted by the previous administration about looking at an addition to the town hall. Primarily to, not only to add more space, but primarily to bring the folks down in the basement upstairs and try to make it more efficient. The basement is not really handicap accessible. We've had issues, over the years. This has been a long-standing goal, I guess, of, the town to try to bring the folks downstairs upstairs. So we were contacted by the the prior board. Some of that was prompted by conversations with John Golden in regards to making a donation towards the project. And I understand that John, is listening, tonight at home. So I want to give John a shout out. I've known John for, a long time, since I've been the engineer here for just my 26th year. And I've always respected John, and glad that he's able to see this. So we gave the town a proposal, which was attached to the package that I sent up last week, we gave the town a proposal for the complete set of plans. And when we do architectural plans, they're in different phases. So we have schematic design, development, construction documents, and then we have bidding, and obviously we have the construction administration. So the prior board wanted to authorize the work, like in phases. Didn't want to authorize the whole proposal. So we did. They did two separate resolutions authorizing us for schematic design and then to start the design development. So that's all that we've been authorized for. So schematic design was done. Basically, the plans that you have here are the result of that. Brad worked up various options on the floor plan. We worked with the prior town board. We also worked with this board, primarily Al and some of the department heads here to make a few changes to the plan. But for the most part, the departments were happy with the floor plan, and the town has signed off on the floor plan because we don't want to go to the more detailed plans and have the floor plan change like a lot. I mean, there still could be some minor changes as we go through and figure things out. And our team at CPL, consisting of Brad, a couple other architects, HVAC, like electrical. We have weekly phone calls to keep up on the progress, and so there may be some minor tweaks to this, but again, we'll be working with the town on that. So in order to advance the plans, and we provided in my September 28th proposal, we provided like a schedule where we want to get the plans out to bid in January of next year. That's a prime time for bidding. It gets on contractors' radar like early on. So we've worked internally to put together a team. So we included with the proposal, which the proposal will cover the next phase of work, which is the construction documents, the bidding phase, and then also the construction administration phase. Right now, we're in the design development phase, which is basically taking, the concept like plans and having our other disciplines such as mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, architects working like together, fine-tuning things, looking at like concepts for how are we going to provide heating and cooling for the addition, how are we going to tie the structural into the roof, those kind of things. And then so the next set of documents that we'll be providing the town, the design development plans, which are scheduled for November, is they will have a little more detail on the plans that you have here, but it's going to be mostly narratives on these are the type of HVAC units we're going to use, this is how we're going to tie in the structural, and we'll be working together with the town, with Al's got a lot of construction background. Obviously we've had Donnie Westermeyer has been like involved from the beginning. We've been going through plans with him. Brad and Don have been going back and forth on sprinkler system, no sprinkler system, which we don't. Access like pass, like egress, like major items, so that we could at least make sure that the concept floor plan that we have here, for the most, not for the most part, but meets the major building code items. So the proposal that I had submitted, like I said, was for the completion of the plan so that we can put them out, for bid. I'm trying to think of what else. For the most part, as I had put in here, the cost for our services, for the most part, follows the May 2021 overall proposal that we had given the town. There was a couple things that came up during the early stages of design development that weren't like anticipated, such as the building, as you can see on the plans, like extends out this way towards 9, and so we were concerned about the northwest corner of the building and its relation to the property line. Now, in this particular zoning district, we have a 0 lot line setback, so we needed to make sure that any overhang on the building does not exceed, the property line. So there was no survey, so we had to bring in our survey guys. They did a boundary survey of the town hall. We confirmed, I don't remember, did you have to move it back a little bit, or were we okay?
We were in the middle of adjusting anyway, so it worked out to our advantage.
Yeah, so, so we're good with that. So we had to do some property survey. In my letter, I said that was approximately $2,500. We also, as part of the design development, we were authorized to bring in a subcontractor to do borings. We obviously have to do, borings so we know how to design our foundations. So in the course of that work, they came across material that was not so great. Having worked here over the years, I know the site is very good sand and gravel from other excavations we've done over the years. However, apparently, what had happened was when they took down the old building that was on this site, when they built the town hall, it appears that they demolished the building and filled in the old foundation for the building, which happens to be right out in front. So for the most part, the footprint of the new addition has got unsuitable materials in it now. So what we did as a follow-up, we had the highway department, Howie, was good enough to bring his backhoe over, and because when we do like borings, it's just a very small, hole. So Howie came over with the backhoe. We dug, I believe, 2 or 3 test pits, wider, like test pits. So it confirmed, the old unsuitable fill material down to a depth of about 8 feet, which pretty much matches what, the foundation depth probably would have been, like back in the day. After the 8 feet, then we get into, the gravel. So, as part of the project, we talked about different ways, to deal with that. And in the end, we believe it's more cost effective, and I believe some of the contractors up on, the board feel, the same way, that it's more cost effective to excavate the unsuitable material and bring in new material, and compact it, like in lifts. So that in itself provided some extra, or like resulted in some extra costs, a little bit more like design cost on our part. I think I had about, $3,500 in there for that. But the bigger one is we have to bring in a compaction testing firm. We had one anyways, because they would have to do compaction tests on the foundation, on the footings for the outer walls, but now they're going to have to do the compaction throughout the footprint, and it's going to have to be brought up in 8-inch lifts, 12-inch lifts, and they have to test every lift. So we put in an additional $5,000 for the testing firm. Also, in speaking with Al, there was like a desire, and we've always thought about this, to try to like improve the meeting room. It's tired. So we put in, I think it was about $3,500 for our interiors group. I'm going to take some pictures. They're going to come look at some they're going to come up with several like concepts based upon a very limited budget. We don't want to spend like a ton of money in here, but we want to see what we may be able to do, to spruce it up a little bit. Some lighting, maybe something with the tiles. Get rid of the tiles. I'm not quite sure, but we want to come up with a couple concepts, run it by the town, and then when we put out the bid, we would include whatever that is as like an alternate, so that we get a price for it, but we don't necessarily have to accept it. So we're going to have a base bid, which is going to be the work out here, addition, and then we're also going to have another alternate because we want to replace the windows here. Obviously everything over here is going to be brand new, but these old windows, the window here behind us, they're from the 60s, and they're shot. They're drafty. So we're going to put in an alternate to replace them. We'll see what the price is. If it fits in the budget, we can do it. If it doesn't, maybe it can be done at a later point in time. So so that resulted in about I believe about $15,000 in added fees for CPL than what we had originally quoted the town board back in 2021. I'm trying to think of what else I can cover. I think I pretty much covered it all. So we, we're here to answer any questions. I can talk about the fees. Brad developed the plans that you see here in front of you. So if you have any questions on those, we'd be glad to answer them. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Pete, can you explain the necessity of the interior? It's going to be like a mobility lift to get down into the basement.
You wanna do that?
The reason we have to have that?
Yeah, so it's more of bringing everything up to code. I think it's a convenience factor more so. You have a couple of colleagues that really voiced their opinion about bringing files if the basement was to be preserved as a storage space, so you free up most of the good real estate that's up on the upside. This way they can easily move their files on a cart up the elevator lift, and that's the real factor. But obviously there's a convenience to ADA, anyone having a difficult, if you still want to use office space in the basement space, you could actually use the elevator and it will be ADA compatible.
But it's, just to be clear, it's like a lift, right? It's not a like a full-blown elevator like we know an elevator to be, right? It's basically a lift.
Expensive,
right?
Commercially
lift.
available
Mobility.
lift. Yeah.
Right. So it just, I think they're really only meant for one floor for
Typically
the
one
most
floor,
part.
yeah.
So it's not an elevator that can go 3-4 stories. This is just like a lift.
It's slow.
It's like electric, correct?
Yeah, it's slow. It doesn't have an elevator pit, which is an
Right.
advantage too.
Right.
So that's one of the concerns, is not to undermine the existing footings. So we'll stop, we don't have to go down another 5 feet typically for an elevator pit.
And the entranceways will be security entranceways now?
I mean, that's what we were talking about.
Well, it should.
Yeah, we were still talking about whether it's going to be card readers, but that's something that's still on the table, right? So we need to get
That's
verification.
for inside the areas, but for people coming in and out, and the girls in the clerk's office, they'll be able to buzz them through the main doors, so they can't just,
But we
is
have
that
the
one,
building
or is that only
inspectors.
to get into the addition?
Only the addition. I think the last administration voted against having doors, right, at the existing, because
Yeah.
of the, right now you have people coming in freely to go to the clerk's office and things, so, if, you know, we could still talk about that, if that's still, if that's something you wanna address.
But what we did do is on the new addition, you know, you can look at it in large, I think it's, you know, the
Yeah, that's the one.
second plan.
Yeah. First floor plan, enlarged, you see a door,
So if you look at the second plan, which is a blow-up of the new space, you'll see there where the building department is, and we have what we call a service window there, and then right adjacent to that, to the left, is going to be a door. So, you know, a locked door. So the thought process was that someone would come to the service window, you know, I want to go to, you know, the planning department or the zoning, like, administrator. And then they would have to be checked in, and then someone in the building department would, you know, buzz open the door and allow that person to get into, you know, the back area. And that's something that we went over with the building department, and they were okay with that. Now, that does not like address any other, like, security, you know, as Brad said, in regards to, you know, the hallway out here, entrance through, you know, like the back door. But again, that's something that, if the town board wants, like, to look at that for some additional, like, security, you know, we can do that. Again, that's all like part
That's
of.
tweaking.
That's like part of when we submit the plans for design, like, development and like the narratives. We're gonna be sitting down with, you know, whomever that the town board designates. Obviously, like, Al's gonna be, like, involved because of his building experience. Don's gonna be involved, and there could be others. But we're gonna go through everything. We're gonna go through the heating and what we're gonna do, like, electrically. We're gonna look at the floor plan, you know, maybe make some, you know, like, tweaks. You know, and those are things that we can, you know, like, discuss, like, at that time, so that when we proceed to the construction documents, we, you know, like, incorporate those things. And while I'm looking at this plan, you'll also see here in the meeting room, we're providing an area in this back corner for the media room. Now, that's not gonna, it's just gonna be walls, not gonna have, like, a roof on it or anything, but it's gonna be an enclosed space, you know, with glass, you know, like, obviously, so instead of having, you know, our media folks in the basement, they can be up here doing, you know, what they're doing, and being able, like, to see everything. So, as far as, you know, improvements to other areas of the town hall, we're not, well, the only thing we are doing, and it's not shown on this plan, but it's shown on the first plan in the, you know, the package. If you look back by the stairs that go down to the basement, Brad went through and looked at, you know, the code, and based upon the code, we needed to have additional set of bathrooms. So right where, kind of an area where Tad's office is now, we're going to create, are they separate men's and women's room?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, I think they're unisex.
Unisex?
So
Yeah, okay.
gender neutral, yeah.
Yeah, right. You know, like
They're both
ADA.
handicapped.
Yeah, they're both.
Yeah, ADA compliant, and they're in a perfect spot because the plumbing for the other bathrooms are right, like, below that. So we have easy access, well, I don't say easy access, we have, you know, like, access to the plumbing right, like, below, and then it goes out to our septic tank. So other than that, and potentially looking at some, like, aesthetic improvements in here, those are the only improvements that, you know, we're contemplating, you know, like, at this point. Now, as we get into more cost estimating as we get into the construction-like documents, we'll see where we are. Our office, we do hundreds and hundreds of projects, so we get a lot of bids in, so we're keeping up with what the industry is currently like seeing, the supervisors obviously and, the business. So we're going to be monitoring that as we progress, the plans, and we'll have a better handle on things that we might be able to afford and things that we might not be able to afford. And again, that's going to be working, and we're going to have to work closely and quickly because we want to push this. We've staffed it. I know that Mr. Golden would like to see the start of construction, and so I think that everybody wants to move this. So I'll leave it at that.
You had mentioned possibly replacing some windows here. Were you referring to just this part of the building or all the exterior windows?
All the exterior down
As an alternate.
Okay,
as an alternate.
so the whole?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I know John's watching because I called him the other day to make sure he was watching.
He's a
Says
good
he
man.
watches every board meeting anyway, so. But this one, I was excited, and John and I both were gonna go down there again, but we know how Mr. Golden's doing, so I called him, and he was quite excited.
Yeah, and some of, the elevations that you see in here, I think we provided a couple different, colors. There's like a gray and like a yellow, and, that's really for, the town and, John, to hash through.
Pete, let me ask you one question. The bathrooms, what initiated additional bathrooms? I mean, if we're keeping the same footprint and we're just enlarging the square footage out here, did that put us over the top to have
Yeah,
additional?
Occupant load, the additional occupant load, yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Okay, thank you, Pete, Brad.
That's it. Thank you.
Thanks,
Look
guys.
forward to it.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you very much.
You want to give this one?
Yeah. Caroline, here you go.
Okay, we have a
you.
second, what?
I just said thank you to them.
Who said?
Said thank you to them.
Oh, I did, you did?
I said,
Oh, okay. Huh? I'm going into we'll now have the workshop on the Green Amendment, and Ward 2 Councilwoman, Lynn, the liaison to the CAC, will introduce everything.
Okay, thank you. Being the liaison, we have liaison to various groups, so we can't all learn about every single group. So I'm privileged enough to be the liaison to CAC, and I thought it was important that everyone learn about the legal requirements to in this case, the Green Amendment that was passed in 2021. So we're very lucky tonight to have a specialist that is going to address us. But I'm going to first introduce you to, for those who don't know, Richard Maddox, because we're also really lucky, I believe, to have him as part of Hyde Park and all the hard work he's been doing. And he is our liaison to Dr. Q. Thank you, Richard.
Absolutely, and I see that Dr. Q is on the screen now. Several months back, the board asked the Conservation Advisory Council to take a look at the Green Amendment issue, or the Environmental Rights Amendment is what it's also properly called, and asked to explore the possibility of getting somebody into the meeting room here so that you folks could better understand that amendment to the Constitution and the significance to you. And I reflected back on some webinars and speeches that webinars and meetings I've attended in Pace Law School, Dr. Robinson and Dr. Q, the work that they've done on a green amendment. And we're fortunate this evening to have Dr. Q with us. Katrina Fisher Q is the Hyde Distinguished Professor of Environmental Law at the Elizabeth Hyde School of Law at Pace University and co-editor of Climate Change Law and Introduction and the Law of Adaptation to Climate Action, United States and International Aspects. She also served as chair of the New York State Bar Association Task Force on Environmental Aspects of the New York State Constitution. Before entering academia, Professor Q worked in the environmental and litigation practice groups in the New York office of Arnold Porter and as an advisor on natural resource policy in the United States Senate. She received her undergraduate and law degrees from Yale and served as a law clerk to Judge Charles S. Hyde of the District Court of the Southern District of New York, and also to law clerk to Judge Diane Gibbon-Mortz of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. We're fortunate to have Dr. Q with us. Those individuals who may be coming in on the Zoom calls, please make sure and mute yourselves and hold your questions until the end of Dr. Q's presentation, and that way we won't hear too many toilets being flushed. So, Dr. Q.
Thank you so much for having me, Richard. I'd like to start and just make sure everyone can hear me and also see the PowerPoint I've shared.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So just to start with some basics, the Green Amendment provision to the New York State Constitution was added by virtue of legislation that passed 2 successive legislatures and then was adopted by voters in November of 2021. It was adopted by a relatively large margin with 70% of New Yorkers voting in favor of the constitutional amendment. In terms of some of the issues that motivated the adoption of the amendment, I'll start by saying this isn't just, I'm providing this to you not just for historical interest, but because actually in interpreting and applying the Constitution, courts will look in part to what voters understood about why it was adopted. So most people would say that the experience with discovery of PFOA contamination in Hoosick Falls and other places around New York was part of what motivated the movement to amend the New York State Constitution. I think something that's interesting from the perspective of local governments is to recall that when the village of Hoosick Falls discovered the contamination of its water with these chemicals, they actually went to the New York State Department of Health and were reassured that nothing was wrong with the water in the sense that it didn't violate any existing laws. That was actually true. So unfortunately, the Safe Drinking Water Act just wasn't moving quickly enough to address these contaminants to the point where it was clear to the residents of Hoosick Falls that this wasn't a level of chemical to which they were comfortable being exposed. Yet nonetheless, under existing laws on the book, it was perfectly legal for the chemicals to be in the drinking water. And so this provides some sense that part of what motivated the adoption of the amendment was the recognition that despite the fact that we have many good environmental laws on the books in New York, sometimes they aren't adequate. I think another issue that motivated the adoption of the amendment was the recognition that, again, despite the existence of many strong environmental laws on the books in New York, we've come to understand that we nonetheless have pockets in New York, environmental justice communities that have historically been and continue to be subject to ambient levels of pollution that far exceed those of other areas in the state. And I think the importance of that background is to understand that when New Yorkers adopted the amendment, looking at some of the reasons or issues that were percolating that encouraged the adoption of the amendment, it seems clear that it was designed to go beyond and augment existing statutory laws on the books. So this is the text of the amendment is shown at the top, and I did want to make sure that everyone understands that there actually are other provisions in the New York State Constitution that talk about the environment. So many of you are probably familiar with the Forever Wild provisions of the Constitution that provide explicit protection for lands primarily in the Adirondacks. In addition, the New York State Constitution includes the language, the broad language you see below, which might prompt you to ask, why did we go about amending the Constitution if it already provided for protection of the environment, and what, if anything, does the Green Amendment change? I think there are two answers to that, and this comes from my experience working with a task force convened by the New York State Bar Association to think about the New York State Constitution from an environmental perspective. The first is, on our task force, we had numerous individuals who have spent their careers working to protect the Adirondacks Park and using the Forever Wild provisions of the state constitution that enshrine those protections to do so. Those individuals were absolutely opposed to the idea of holding a constitutional convention that would open up the entire Constitution to potential amendment, because they didn't want to touch a hair on the head of the Forever Wild provisions of the state constitution, because they had proved so important in continuing to protect the forest areas in the Adirondacks. But in addition, the language that I showed you before that's in the Constitution related to environmental protection, and the statement that it's the policy of the state to conserve and protect natural resources, had been held in New York to not be self-executing. So on the one hand, we had constitutional language that was narrow in the sense that it was limited to the Forever Wild provisions and forest reserve areas that were specifically designated. And to the extent we had a broader explicit recognition of environmental protection, courts have held it wasn't self-executing. What does that mean? What that essentially means is that the text of the Constitution itself didn't provide any rights or protections. Instead, it was only once the legislature adopted a statute that those provisions would then be potentially invoked in court and provide additional protections. So this gives you a sense of where the environmental rights provision sits in the New York State Constitution. Again, I'm not providing you with this just for information. It actually is potentially important as courts think about how to interpret and apply the amendment that it appears in the Bill of Rights provision. The state constitution, alongside other fundamental rights, like rights to freedom of speech and freedom of religion. To give you some perspective in terms of where, now this says U.S. Constitution, but I couldn't find one that said state constitution, but you can just replace that in your mind. The idea here is that all laws in the state of New York need to be in compliance with our constitutional provisions, and that would include now the local laws and ordinances that local governments are adopting. On the right-hand side, you'll see we have a whole host of statutes, state statutes adopted by our legislature that are addressed to the environment. I think we'll have a period of litigation in courts helping us understand precisely how the new constitutional provision relates to these statutory rights. I think probably the best way to understand it is that it, in some instances, to the extent these statutes miss the mark, don't go far enough, are languishing and not being enforced appropriately, the existence of the constitutional right at least provides the potential to provide some additional legal authority. So constitutional rights, although are new to New York in the sense of being in our Bill of Rights provision of the Constitution, are quite common around the world. So approximately 150 countries have environmental rights provisions in their constitutions. There are many nations that are subject to regional agreements that recognize a right to a healthy environment. In 2021, the Human Rights Council voted to recognize a human right to a healthy environment, and just this past July, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution recognizing the right to a clean and healthy environment. Probably more on point for us today, there are other states in the United States, many states in the United States, that incorporate environmental considerations into their constitution in some fashion. Of these, I would say there are really only 2.5 that contain environmental rights provisions that are potentially comparable to those that we've adopted in New York. So probably the two best examples we can look to of other states that have constitutional environmental rights that are akin to the environmental right we've recently adopted in New York, primarily Pennsylvania and Montana. Some would argue Hawaii. There's a bit of an argument about whether the state of Hawaii's constitutional provisions constitute a full-blown green amendment or not, but I'm going to provide you with an example from Hawaii anyway. So I thought might be useful to stop and take a quick breath. Where we are in New York State right now is that we've recently adopted this constitutional environmental right. We're in the process now of understanding as a legal matter what it means and how it will apply. One source of information about how it may potentially apply is to look to other states that have similar constitutional provisions and to see how it's been interpreted and applied in those jurisdictions. So that's going to give us some time to do. And I think the state from the state from whom or which we can probably learn the most is Pennsylvania. I'm giving you the text of Pennsylvania's Constitution, Environmental Rights Amendment. The most significant distinction between the Environmental Rights Amendment in Pennsylvania's Constitution and the Green Amendment adopted in New York State is that Pennsylvania also announces, in addition to announcing a right to clean air, pure water, and the preservation of the environment, which is very similar to the language adopted in New York, Pennsylvania also goes on to add that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is a trustee of natural resources in the state of Pennsylvania. And both of those provisions or descriptions of the scope of the right have been important in Pennsylvania. So when I talk to you about decisions in Pennsylvania, something to keep in mind is that their constitutional language in Pennsylvania includes the explicit assertion of this public trust responsibility, which is somewhat different than the language we have in New York. So something that I thought that you all would find interesting as members of the town board is that for many, many years, for decades, the constitutional environmental right in Pennsylvania basically lay dormant. It lay dormant because early court interpretations of it created a test to show a violation of the environmental right that was so difficult to establish that it was almost impossible. So basically the environmental right sat gathering dust for a very long time until it was breathed new life by a plurality of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in the case Robinson Township versus Commonwealth. What's interesting from a local government perspective about this case is that the Supreme Court in this case struck down a state law on the grounds that it violated in part, at least according to a plurality, the Environmental Rights Amendment in Pennsylvania because it preempted local zoning authority by requiring local governments to allow fracking operations into their communities and stripping from local governments any control over where those fracking operations could be located. So kind of the first rebirth of the Environmental Rights Amendment in Pennsylvania came in the form of use of the Environmental Rights Amendment to protect and elevate local government's ability to use their zoning authority to protect the environmental rights of their citizens. So one question that oftentimes comes up is, does an environmental rights amendment lead to an explosion in litigation? So this is what I'm showing you here is one of the leading scholars on Pennsylvania's environmental rights amendment is John Dernbach. He looked at a period of 4 years after the Robinson Township case was decided to take a look at how litigation was proceeding under the newly reborn Environmental Rights Amendment in Pennsylvania. What may be of interest to you is of the cases that were brought, 5 were actually brought against local governments. And so what I want to do is to give you a sense of what those cases looked like and how they turned out. By way of a spoiler, all of the challenges to local government decisions were rejected. And in addition, despite the fact that many of the plaintiffs or challengers in those cases were arguing that local governments should have conducted what they called a pre-decision analysis of environmental impacts on constitutionally protected rights, courts, at least to date in Pennsylvania, have not agreed with them. So to give you a sense of the kind of cases that have come up in Pennsylvania, the first case that I'll highlight is Frederick versus Allegheny Township. This was a challenge that was brought to a town's zoning ordinance amendment that allowed oil and gas operations in all zoning districts under certain conditions. The ordinance amendment was ultimately upheld. The court held that the challengers had not shown that they had not shown proof that there was a harm to constitutionally protected resources as a result of the zoning ordinance amendment. And further, the court held that the township was not required to conduct a pre-decision analysis of the impact of the amendment on constitutional rights before adopting it. Another case that may be of interest is a challenge that was brought to a zoning ordinance special exception that allowed fracking in 2 districts in a Pennsylvania township. Interestingly here, and I think this is a useful note for those working in local government, the special exception explicitly provided that entities making an application would have to, quote, demonstrate that the drill site operations will not violate the citizens of Penn Township's right to clean air and pure water as set forth in the Environmental Rights Amendment in Pennsylvania. Citing to that language, the court held that the applicants didn't demonstrate a violation of the environmental right. But of course, you can see there how the town, in structuring and designing its special exception process, had explicitly considered, taken into account, and required a showing related to satisfaction of the environmental right. 2 other cases that may be of interest because they involve local governments. The first was, this is not a challenge to a zoning ordinance amendment or similar. Instead, it was a challenge to a township's issuance of a grading permit to allow the construction of a pipeline. Again, the court here held that the objectors had not proved that the township's action in granting the permit had unreasonably impaired rights enshrined under Pennsylvania's Environmental Rights Amendment. And the last case is a little bit different, and I think suggests a different way that local governments can think about environmental rights and the potential that they provide. In this case, a utility had come in, and the utility had different rules or a different approach to where and how gas meters could be located. It conflicted with a local ordinance. The city of Reading invoked the Environmental Rights Amendment in an effort to argue that its zoning ordinance should not, its city ordinance should not be deemed preempted by the utility rule. The court ultimately disagreed, but I think the interesting takeaway is that I do think it's fair for local governments to understand that environmental rights amendments can be understood both as a limitation on unconstitutional action by local governments, but also as another source of authority for local governments to take action that is consistent with and advances the environmental right. I'll go through these more quickly because I think the cases in Montana and Hawaii are perhaps not as much of interest, but this, I'm giving you here the text of Montana's environmental constitutional provisions. They actually are quite similar to the language that's used in New York. And one case I'll just highlight coming out of Montana that's somewhat interesting is a case where a Montana court held that legislation that was adopted that would have allowed a large gold mining operation to proceed without conducting any water testing or reviews consistent with the state's anti-degradation requirements for water bodies was unconstitutional. And I'm giving you here the text of Hawaii's constitutional provisions. As you see, they're a bit more involved in the very simple language that we've adopted in New York. But one example that I would, cite to that we can think about something that or at least a legal way that environmental rights have been implemented is that in Hawaii, the courts invoked the environmental rights provision to support more robust implementation of a state environmental statute. So in this case, the state of Hawaii had adopted a law adopting as its energy policy the encouragement of additional renewable energy. A utility had proposed to grant a permit to extend and continue the operation of a partially coal-fired fossil fuel plant. And the Sierra Club challenged the utility's failure to consider the impacts of the grant of the permit on climate change. In this case, the court held that the utility the state environmental agency, prior to granting the permit, was required to hold a hearing and to consider the issues raised by Sierra Club because Sierra Club had a due process right to be heard on the issue as a result of the existence of both the state statute and the environmental right provision in Hawaii. So where are we now? We're in very early stages in New York State of understanding what the legal, how our environmental right will be understood, interpreted, and applied. Important things that courts will be looking to: the legislative history surrounding the adoption of the right. What did voters understand about it? What did they think it was accomplishing, and why? There's also the possibility of looking to, we have a large and robust body of case law in New York regarding the implementation of other environmental rights, including the right to education. And we can also look to some of the cases from other jurisdictions for a bit of guidance, and I've gone through some of those with you already. So I have to pause here and tell you, I'm making my best guess. We do not have a single ruling from a single court in New York. So what I'm going to do is give you my best guess on what some of the likely legal questions are that will come up and how I think they're likely to be resolved. First, I think it's there are arguments that the right in New York is not self-executing. What that means is that the constitutional text itself would not really have any effect unless and until the legislature adopted a law to give it effect. I think kind of my objective kind of reading and analysis suggests that this right is likely to be held to be self-executing, in part because constitutional provisions in New York are presumed to be self-executing. Other broad rights in Article 1 in the Bill of Rights section have been held to be self-executing. And moreover, it seems pretty clear here that the Green Amendment was adopted to go beyond existing laws on the books. I think it's also quite clear that the right applies to local government. It's quite plainly understood in New York that local laws cannot be inconsistent with the Constitution or with any general laws. And in fact, there are even arguments that some quasi-public entities could be held to be subject to the right as well. My best interpretation is that the right probably is not enforceable against private parties, and what I'm showing you here is to compare the language of environmental or of constitutional provisions that have been held to be enforceable against private parties versus those that have not. As you'll note, our Green Amendment doesn't contain any language explicitly providing that it can be enforced against, quote, any other person or by any firm, corporation, or institution, which suggests that it's different. And again, it's possible in terms of what kind of relief can someone get under the environmental right. A damages remedy is possible. In other words, is it possible someone can sue and obtain monetary damages? It's possible, but the showing that they would have to make, it's probably not, I would say it's not probable. It's possible, but not probable. And there would have to be some pretty compelling facts and a very particular context to allow a damages remedy to be issued. To close, I'll close. I'm only aware of one case that's been filed under the Green Amendment. It's Fresh Air Fund for the East Side versus New York. The suit has been brought against, it relates to the operation of a landfill. I believe it's in Monroe County. The suit has been brought against the private entity that operates the landfill, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and the City of New York. It's been brought against the City of New York because it is the garbage from the City of New York that's being disposed of at the landfill. The case is still undergoing, I think it's the procedural posture is that they have briefed and had oral argument on motions to dismiss. Some of the questions we've already talked about have come up. So some of the defendants have argued the right doesn't apply to them because they're private parties. Some have argued the right is not self-executing. Some have argued that the existence of a permit means there can be no constitutional violation. There are a lot of procedural questions about whether the case should have been styled or brought as an Article 78 proceeding instead of being brought as a declaratory judgment action, which is what it was brought at. So a lot of kind of preliminary threshold issues that will be considered, and I think everyone will be, I'll certainly be interested to see how the court comes out. So I'll leave you with that. In short, the takeaways, I think, if I was in local government, I think one thing to be mindful of is that now that we do have this constitutional right, you should approach your decisions mindful that you are subject to and required to respect New Yorkers' right to clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment. I think it's fair to understand the right as a potential source of authority for your decision making. So if you're thinking about contemplating taking an action, wondering whether you have authority or what supports it, if you're contemplating taking action that would advance environmental interests, I think the Green Amendment can provide an additional source of authority. And finally, if you're taking actions that may have environmental impacts, I think it would be prudent to acknowledge the existence of your obligations under the Green Amendment and explain why you understand your actions to be consistent with them. I would expect that the vast majority of time, the compliance with our existing suite of environmental laws in New York would probably satisfy the constitutional minimums required, but not always. And so despite the fact that Pennsylvania courts have not required a pre-decision analysis of consistency with the environmental right, if I was kind of being prudent and careful, I would probably recognize in decision-making with significant environmental impacts that you understand that this right exists, that you have considered it, and that you believe the action you're taking is consistent with it and the reasons why.
Thank you, Dr. Q.
Yes, thank you
Perhaps
very much.
a very comprehensive review on this. Thank you very much. Perhaps we can entertain some questions from the dais.
I'm good, I understood it. Just letting us know how old we're getting. There's another professor that you bring in that looks like just got out of high school.
Well, I think it's fair to say, Mr. Supervisor, that in spite of all of her experience and background and the grind of her profession, she's preserved well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's probably just the touch up my appearance function on Zoom.
So can I just say, I mean, it was very comprehensive, obviously, and aside from Sarah, we probably didn't get all the legal impact of this. So just for some concrete, if that's even possible, because I know we need all these precedents and everything. If there were, say, for example, water contaminants in a part of the town, could the constituents of that area sue the town board based on this?
So it's not entirely clear. So one question is if the clearest case for application of the amendment is if you as a town board have taken some action. It might then be challenged on the grounds that it violates. So the question to me would be, well, what action would they be challenging? And I think it's harder to argue. Now, they might possibly be able to argue that there was some kind of positive obligation that the amendment imposed, but we don't even know if we can make the simple case yet, which is to challenge a specific decision. And so I guess the question for me would be, what is the town action that they would be challenging in that context?
So this sounds to me, but maybe I have it wrong, this sounds to me like we are being proactive and sort of like trailblazers in trying to understand this amendment and how we as a town board should deal with it at this point. Is that accurate?
I think that's right. And I think, I would be mindful if you have an important land use decision, a decision affecting the town of Hyde Park that's going to have some significant environmental impacts, it would probably be worthwhile in whatever official record you make of your decision to state, we understand this constitutional environmental right exists. We have considered it when we made our decision. Here's why we think the decision we made is consistent with a right to clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment. And to some extent, just acknowledging that you understand the obligation exists, that you considered it, and that you believe it was satisfied in the event that someone should choose to challenge your decision on the grounds that it doesn't satisfy constitutional minimums. You would have that to support your decision. Now, I would also say, I think, generally, as something nice about that is that one of the goals, I think, in adopting the Green Amendment was to encourage decision makers throughout the state to be mindful of these things, right?
And I think, if I may, because I work as the attorney to the town, and what Dr. Q said earlier, about what the town already does will help advance this amendment and meet our obligations as a local government is really on point, because we have seeker, the planning board does a thorough review, so it's that you already have these protections in place that would limit liability for the local government, because those reviews are being done. So this is just another layer, a constitutional layer, to adding protection for your constituents. But rest assured that a lot is in place already that Hyde Park is doing. So I think your boards are very equipped. I work with the ZBA. I know the planning board's in very good hands as well. So I think that the town itself does a very good job, which is important. You have a lot of waterways here, a lot of wetlands. We're right on the river. So thank you so much for the presentation. It was very informative.
Thank you. And I would encourage you all, I personally think the biggest effect these constitutional environmental rights can have is by shaping and influencing the behavior of local decision makers and agency actors. And so I really think it's an opportunity for you all. And I will say, having spent a lot of time in Hyde Park during the pandemic at the Petite Chateau Inn on Dorsey Lane, you're doing a wonderful job. It was just a beautiful place to be. So carry on.
Thank you. It's very nice. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate your
Very
time and
much.
your expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Richard.
You're certainly welcome.
Richard, before you leave, I'd like to thank was it the professor and students at Marist College that had made this?
Yes, sir.
Hopefully we could pan over to show what this is. Can you give a brief explanation of what it is? Because she'll explain it much better than I can.
The challenge that the students and the professor had before them was to show the outline of the town of Hyde Park. To put the street names on the vast majority of the streets in Hyde Park. And also to identify the Fallkill watershed and tributaries contributing to the Fallkill watershed. So all of that is here on the board, as well as wetlands and state-regulated wetlands, riparian buffers, and so that's what we have here. It's nice plexiglass here, so you can point and we can wipe it off very easily.
Great.
Now take the camera and point it that way. He's getting it. Thank you, Richard.
Anything further?
Well, I'd like to say thank you also, and thank you for the assistance in trying to give us a hand with the Piece of Terror and the dam and the Marist students and all their work that they're doing with us, and hopefully we're going to have a lot more continuing projects that they can help us with and navigate our way to try to solve some of these wetland issues and flooding issues. And I thank you very much.
Certainly welcome. The flooding issues are paramount on so many of our minds.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Certainly welcome.
Take a motion for executive session. I'd like to ask for a motion to enter an executive session to discuss the personal history of a particular person. I don't think that's what it's for, but. May I have a second?
Second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
So I ask for a motion to come to return from the executive session.
So moved?
Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Okay. To the resolutions.
Let's start.
Yes? You're in the room?
Resolution 10-3, number 1 of 2021. Resolution authorizing the Town of Hyde Park Town Board to allow Vanderwater and Vanderwater LLP Kyle W. Barnett Esquire of Council to enter into a consent order and judgment to settle the tax certiorari proceedings brought by East Park Mobile Home Sales and Court against the Town of Hyde Park for the tax year 2019.
All right, may I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carried.
Resolution 10-3-2 of 2022, resolution authorizing the Town of Hyde Park Town Board to allow Vanderwater and Vanderwater LLP Kyle W. Burnett Esquire of Council to enter into a consent order and judgment to settle the tax cert proceedings brought by Market Street Mobile Home Park LLC against the Town of Hyde Park for the tax year 2021 and 2022.
All right, may I
Second.
have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
Resolution 10-3-3 of 2022. Resolution authorizing the Town of Hyde Park Town Supervisor to execute and hold a harmless agreement with Pine Brook HOA, allowing cameras to be installed on the lighting poles for the Town of Hyde Park Pine Brook Lighting District.
All right, may I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
Resolution 10-3-4 of 2022, resolution authorizing the Town of Hyde Park Town Board to acknowledge the resignation of Town of Hyde Park historian Shannon Butler.
May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
With
Motion
regret.
carried. Now we gotta find a new historian. She did a great job.
Resolution 10-3-5 of 2022, resolution authorizing the Town of Hyde Park Town Board to acknowledge the resignation of Town of Hyde Park Webmaster Teresa Gasparini.
May I have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you, Teresa.
Resolution 10-3-6 of 2022. Resolution authorizing the Town of Hyde Park Town Board to approve vacation carryover for the Town of Hyde Park Personnel Assistant Heidi Peters.
All right, may I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
Resolution 10-3-7 of 2022, resolution authorizing the Town of Hyde Park Town Board to accept grant funding from the Bureau of Justice, BJA, for the Hyde Park Police Department's participation in the 2022 Bulletproof Vest Partnership, BJA, grant program.
May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No, motion carried.
Resolution 10-3-8 of 2022, resolution authorizing the Town of Hyde Park Town Supervisor to execute an intermunicipal agreement with Dutchess County and other municipalities to allow the Town of Hyde Park Police Department to participate in a threat assessment group for Dutchess County.
All right, may I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
Resolution 10-3-9 of 2022. Resolution authorizing the Town of Hyde Park Town Supervisor to submit the 2023 New York State Office of Children and Family Services Youth Development Grant through the Dutchess County Department of Community and Family Services for the Town of Hyde Park Recreation Learn to Swim program.
May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
Resolution 10-3-10 of 2022, resolution authorizing the Town of Hyde Park Town Board to authorize the Board of Ethics to retain special legal counsel to assist in handling an ethics complaint.
Prior to voting, the attorneys would like to correct and potentially point out an amendment to this. It would be in the fourth whereas clause. It's related to a complaint made to the Board of Ethics. Under the town code, our firm serves as attorneys to the town and also to the Board of Ethics. We would not be recusing from the matter entirely. We would recuse from representing the Board of Ethics, but we would still represent the town. So we just want to clarify that. So as far as the wording, that would be recommended to amend, a potential conflict of interest exists to warrant, let me think, to warrant Vandewater and Vandewater's abstention from providing legal guidance to the Ethics Board. Donna, did you get that?
Yes.
Okay. No, may I have a second?
Well, we have to,
Yeah, you have to make this.
Vote on accepting the amendment as proposed.
Oh, okay.
a motion and a second.
We have a motion and a second for the amendment.
Make a motion?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Okay, so you
No.
accepted the amended version,
yes.
and now you have to vote on that. Correct, Donna?
Yes, as amended, so a motion and a second to
Okay.
vote on the
I
resolution.
make a
as
motion
amended.
to accept it as amended.
As amended, and a second?
Second?
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you, everybody.
All right.
Authorize, Resolution 10-311 of 2022. Resolution authorizing the Town of Hyde Park Town Board to retain the services of CPL Architectural Engineering Planning to proceed with the construction documents, bidding, and construction administration services for Town of Hyde Park Town Hall remodeling and expansion project.
May I have a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No, carried. Okay. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good.